Hello and welcome to the Astranti Pre-Scene Analysis video series for the May 2018 Strategic Case Study exam on content streaming service Couchweb. So before we begin, I'm just going to start by telling you a little bit about myself and a bit about how we are going to approach the pre-scene and the things we're going to be looking for. So my name is Peter Steffer. I am the Director of CIMA here at Astranti. I've been with the company since 2013, and during that time I've written and marked many of the mock exams that we provide, and I've also written mocks for other tuition providers. I've also written many of the study texts that you may have used. And if you see in the bottom left hand corner there, my Facebook page, on the run up to the exam I'll be posting all kinds of hints and tips. So now let's take a look at the video series themselves. So for starters, I'm going to go through the pre-scene section by section, picking up on all the key points, the things that you should be looking for, the things you should be pulling out of the text and analysing. I'll then be applying them to the case itself, what they mean for the company and what it means for the industry that it operates in. Applying certain business models to it, ones that you may have learnt in your objective test studies, and the likely exam issues. So looking at it and thinking, based on this information, a likely question is X. And also other just hints and tips, general things that will help you gain extra marks in the exam. I'll then go on to my strategic analysis video, which will be taking the pre-scene as a whole and summarizing it and applying it into lots of different key business models and key business theories before rounding up with my top 10 issues. So these are the most likely things I think are going to come up in the actual exam. So how's it going to work? As I said, I'm going to go through it section by section. I'm going to assume that you haven't read the pre-scene. I'm going to assume that this is all new to you and we are going through it together for the first time. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to make notes yourself. So I'll stop the videos at the start of each one and ask you to make notes on a certain number of pages, and then we'll go back and review it together. And as I've said, at the end we'll go through a full strategic analysis and top 10 issues. So first of all, some key things that you should be aware of. Now the pre-scene is the context of the exam. It's the context of the company that is being examined. The background information, as it were. So once you've read the pre-scene, this should all be forming a foundation in your mind, and when you go into the actual exam, all the unseen questions that come up in the actual exam, you should be answering them based on this base context from the pre-scene. But it's worth noting that you shouldn't write anything based on the pre-scene. That's because you're not necessarily going to be tested on something that's in the pre-scene. You'll be tested on the unseen material that you are given in the exam. If that unseen material is nothing to do with the material in the pre-scene, then you shouldn't be using the pre-scene material to answer the question. You must always use the unseen material. Having said that, you should always be thinking about the pre-scene material. Now, you're given this in advance for a reason. You're supposed to learn it and you're supposed to gain as much understanding as you can about the company so that you can use this information in the actual exam. And the first thing that we see when we look at the pre-scene is this small section here looking at our role. Now, a lot of people, when they first get the pre-scene, they'll skip past the role, they'll skip past the introduction to the company because they want to get straight on to the perhaps more meaty bits, such as the financial statement, such as the risk statement, the composition of the board. But just as the pre-scene is the context in which the exam will be based on, the context in which the unseen will be based on, the introduction to the pre-scene is also the context to which the pre-scene will be based on. So there's actually a lot of information to pick up here very early on that will allow us to perhaps look at the rest of the pre-scene in a bit more detail, that will allow us to look at the pre-scene knowing what we are looking for based on what will be expected of us in the exam. So the first thing we can see here is that we are a senior manager in the finance function at Couchweb. So a senior manager, and we report directly to the board and advise them on special projects and strategic matters. So already we should be thinking about a few things here. So we are a senior manager. That's the level that we are working at. So we're not going to be looking at very basic operational things. We're going to be looking at strategy. We're going to be looking at how the business can take itself forward. We'll also be looking at providing information to the board of directors of the company, who make the decisions that change the way in which the business runs, that make the decisions to go ahead with new strategies, etc. So they aren't going to want huge bits of information and be expected to funnel that all together to come out with a suitable conclusion themselves. So what this means for you is that we need to be making recommendations. So we must be looking at the information, analyzing the information, and coming up with a conclusion that we present to the board. Remember your audience. The board want nice, clear-cut bits of information to allow them to make effective decisions. They don't want to be given a spreadsheet with hundreds of thousands of lines of random bits of data on and be expected to come up with it themselves. So we must make recommendations that allow them to make strategic decisions. So we need to keep strategy in mind. The company's strategy. What is the company's strategy? Does this new topic that we're looking at, this new plan we're looking at, new project, does it tie in with the company's strategy? Is it something that we should be doing? And one way you can do that is by looking at the suitability, acceptability, feasibility model. Now, this is a model that I will refer to throughout this pre-scene analysis because I think it's the most important model, one of the most important models for the strategic case study. And the reason why it's really good is because it also allows you to structure your answers well, because it considers the strategy. It considers the stakeholders. It considers the resources of the organization. So by using that model, applying that model to anything that you are looking at, already puts you in a good position where you are thinking strategically, where you are looking at the big picture, taking a broad approach to assess stakeholders, to assess strategy, to assess resources such as manpower, resources such as finance and funding, etc. And also a key point here about special projects. Now, when you see special projects, you should be thinking about man management. You should be thinking about project management, which of course are the things that you studied at E2. Now, I'm not saying that you need to go back to the E2 syllabus and relearn all of E2, because I appreciate that for many of you that was a while ago now, but just be aware that certain project management and people management topics within E2 may be relevant for the strategic case study. It's also worth noting that CIMA considers anything up to this point to be assumed knowledge, and therefore it's not actually wrong of them, or it's not necessarily something they won't do to test you on things that you have learnt prior to strategic level, because it's considered assumed knowledge. It's considered things that you should still know about, even if it's not something that you've been directly tested on recently or directly revised recently. But primarily the exam will still focus on the strategic syllabus. So what I mean is, don't go back to E1 to P1 to F1, E2, F2, P2, etc. and spend all your time learning and researching those syllabuses, because as a whole, they will not be relevant. I'm just letting you know. My job as a tutor is to let you know anything that could happen. So just be aware that particularly with regards to some of those project management tools, it couldn't hurt to just refresh your memory with regards to them, because it will be part of your role, the role that you are playing in the case study. Also, a couple more things from the strategic syllabus that will be relevant. Obviously, risk management is incredibly important. That's the big P3 topic. You will be expected to analyze these special projects, these strategic matters, from a risk management function as well. You must consider the risks of any project. Yes, this new project sounds good, but what possibly could go wrong? What negative things, unforeseen negative things could happen as a result of going ahead with this project, and how do we deal with them? We also have to think about F3, because we have to think about funding. How are we going to fund these projects? What's our current financial situation like? How much debt have we got running through our organization? Because those, of course, will be relevant as well. The second line we have in the introduction here is that Couchweb is based in mainland, where the currency is the $. Now, whenever you see a currency, you should be thinking about things, risks, etc., financial things that could be affected by changes in currency. So we have to think about interest rates. How is interest rates in mainland going to affect how much debt we take on? How are inflation rates going to affect the prices? These all tie in with strategy. Also, we need to think about if we do trade abroad, if we trade overseas, then we also have to think about currency risks as well. How do we get over the fact that perhaps the $$ is particularly weak or particularly strong against currencies overseas, and we deal with a lot of business overseas? We need to think about how we're going to effectively manage those currency risks. And we can do that, of course, by various hedging techniques that you will have learnt in your P3 studies, such as leading or lagging the payments. This is where you, in a sense, delay or bring forward the date in which you're going to pay or receive money so that you take advantage of the exchange rates being in your favor. Another way, of course, of doing this is to invoice in home currencies all the time. So it doesn't matter whether the dollar or the pound or the euro or the F dollar, E dollar, H dollar, whatever it may be, is strong compared to the $, at the moment, or weak. If you invoice in your home currency, in the $, you're always getting a value of income that is appropriate to you. You're not taking advantage of favorable exchange rates if you invoice in home currencies, but then again, you are not suffering through negative exchange rates or disappointing exchange rates that are going to disadvantage you. And we can see that in mainland, companies prepare their financial statements in accordance with the International Financial Reporting Standards. So of course, we as a company, as Couchweb, have to ensure that we do this. It would be a risk to the organization if we didn't do it, a threat for us in terms of retribution from government should we not do it. But it's also a strength of the organization as well. It's an opportunity for the organization because it means that it then makes it easier to trade internationally. And on the subject of governments, we must also think about the kinds of laws that governments will pass on, particularly as a content provider, as a web-based content provider. Perhaps there are certain laws on what we can and we can't show. Perhaps there are laws on what other governments in other countries on what we can and can't show. So we must have to tailor our services when we are trading overseas, when we are offering our product overseas. We also need to think about the relationships between certain governments. So, for example, if the mainland government falls out with the government of a particular country, then that could cause a trade embargo, it could cause problems with trading within that country. Perhaps huge tariffs are put on exports into that particular country. And that's, again, another risk we have to think about. So before we move on, just to summarize these first two sentences here, or these first two paragraphs, there's actually a wealth of information that we can build on as we go through the rest of the precis. Now, we're already thinking about currency risks. We're already thinking about trade opportunities. We're thinking about relationships with different governments, risks imposed by external factors such as governments, internal risks as well with our own operations. We're also thinking about the resources we have. We're thinking about stakeholders to our organization and also our greater strategy. How are we meeting our strategy on a daily basis? So we'll move on now to the first full page of content, which relates to the company background. So much more of a full introduction into Couchweb, what Couchweb is. You can see the Couchweb is a media streaming company. A media streaming company that offers access to media content over the internet at any time and anywhere. So we should already be thinking about the kinds of shows, the kinds of programs and companies that are like this in real life. So we're already thinking about Netflix, thinking about Hulu, thinking about Amazon Prime, or the Amazon Video Service, which is part of the Amazon Prime. So there would be a good starting point for your background research into the industry itself, very much like these particular companies. And they offer a small monthly fee, just as those aforementioned companies do, and in return, customers can log on to the website and view content online and connect to the service using almost any device that can access the internet, including smart televisions, laptops, tablets, and smartphones. So, real strength of the organization here, or an opportunity for the organization here, is the amount of devices that are connected to the internet. More and more people than ever are watching television online. They are using tablets, they are using smartphones. The more people are owning tablets, more people are owning smartphones. But obviously, if this is what we are providing, we need to already be thinking about the kinds of risks involved. So if we're going to be managing subscriptions to millions and millions of consumers on millions of different devices all over the internet, we need to ensure that we have a well-developed IT strategy, that we have servers capable of processing this amount of data, servers that are capable of running and hosting this amount of content. Because, of course, any risk or anything that happens to the servers, anything that happens to consumers' access could cause problems. Even if it was just for an evening, if just one evening, hundreds of thousands of people sat down to watch their Couchweb account, to watch a program, and found they couldn't access it, that would really annoy them. That would cause a lot of damage to the reputation of the organization. People expect these sorts of things to be working all the time, anytime. Whenever they want to go on it, they want it to be working. Any kind of downtime, even if it's only for a short temporary basis, is going to cause a negative impact, and that's going to circulate, and then that's also going to affect the amount of people who sign up to a Couchweb account. And Couchweb's content is exclusively entertainment, primarily television shows and movies. So again, we should already be thinking about other opportunities. So Netflix recently has started making a lot of its own programs, a lot of its own movies. Now, there's nothing so far to say that Couchweb don't do this as well. If you've looked through the pre-scene and you've seen that they do, please bear with me, because I am, as I mentioned earlier, going through this as if I was reading it all for the first time. So there's opportunities to create their own programs, their own movies, just as Netflix have done. There's also many other ways in which they could expand their product base based on this subscription model. If you think about Amazon, what Amazon does in its subscription model is it also supplies a music streaming service. It also supplies a photo sharing service. It also supplies a storage streaming service, or a cloud-based storage system with its account, so that people can store their information on the cloud, all incorporated in the same monthly price or annual price. So there are new opportunities here for new products. Subscribers log on using their own devices and can search the catalog until they find something they want to watch. So of course we need to have good security here, because there's a real risk of people perhaps sharing accounts, people sharing the information. If there is a way in which they could download, a way in which they could remove content from the Couchweb site, they could then share it, and that would of course be a breach of copyright, which not only would affect our business in that people wouldn't be buying Couchweb accounts, but it would also reflect on us negatively with regards to the content that we get from the companies that produce the television shows, the companies that produce the movies. If we are found to not have a secure site for them to share their content or to offer their content, then they're going to stop selling licenses to their content to us, because they know that if they go give it to us and it's not safe, then that's going to affect them as well. And ways in which real life companies do this is by offering a set amount of subscriptions. So as in, if you sign up for a Netflix account, you can buy either access for one device, 2 devices, or 4 devices. So if we offer that, then it means that not everyone can use our account. So if we buy an account, or if a consumer buys an account and there's no kind of control system in place like that, they may share it with 100 friends. They may post the login details to many different people on Facebook or Twitter or something like that, and suddenly you've got hundreds of people who are using it for free rather than paying this small monthly fee. And so we can perhaps put in a limit on the amount of devices it can be used on with an email confirmation for each new device. And that, in a sense, will mitigate the risk of that happening. And that's another thing to think about as you go through the pre-scene. How do we mitigate all of these different risks? And the chosen content is then streamed to the device, but at the moment they cannot download the material and watch it online. Now this is, I guess, something that will help with control and security, but if they cannot use the material outside of the Couchweb system, as in they can't download it as an MP4 or anything, then you could argue that there's no real risk in downloading the material to watch it offline. In fact, this may actually be a good opportunity for the organization because it will allow them to perhaps have more customers in areas where the internet's not that strong, or people who are going to commute all the time, who want to be able to watch it on the go, watch it where they aren't connected to the internet. And it's something that both Amazon and Netflix do offer. You can download shows off of the site onto your tablet, onto your smartphone. So there's an opportunity there to expand the product range. And all of this would go to help build, in a sense, an improved service. When we think about value chains, we think about how we add value to the consumer. It would improve our service, improve our operations, give people more reasons to sign up for a Couchweb account, thus improve the amount of sales we make and improve the amount of revenue that we get at Couchweb. Now the site that they use tracks the content of each subscriber and builds up a profile. Both of the shows themselves, the television shows, the movies, to see which ones are popular, but also to the individual themselves. They've developed an algorithm that classifies subscribers' viewing histories and then offers them recommendations. So very similar to what you may have seen in your own Amazon or your own Netflix account if you have one. If you don't have either of those, I'm sure you have a Facebook page. It works in the same way. How often have you been looking on Facebook and seen an advert for something that you are interested in? It's not that you have been looking for that. If you've been looking for that, then that may make sense. But if it's something that you've thought about but you've never actually looked at, you're suddenly thinking, how on earth did Facebook think that I might like that? Well, that's the same principle. It builds an algorithm based around you, yourself, what you are doing online, what you are looking at online, and matches that with lots of other bits of information, and then it provides an outcome. It provides information saying that people who have this particular profile are generally interested in XYZ, and then it offers you XYZ. So if you're very much into action films and you watch a lot of action films, it's likely that on your Couchweb account you will have plenty of recommendations saying, if you like this, you may enjoy this, or based on your preferences, we think you'll like this. And Netflix and Amazon do something very similar. So of course, again, we're going back to information strategy, we're going back to IT strategies here. The amount of information processing required at Couchweb will be very high, which is perhaps why it's important that they have a good big data strategy and a good big data system. And that will be critical to the continued success of the organization. It's worth noting that big data is one of the big CIMA topics at the strategic level, particularly from a strategic point of view. So in this instance, Couchweb would be using it to develop the offerings based on what people are liking. So if they're producing hundreds of different shows, they find out which ones do well, find out which ones do well to certain people, and market it directly to them. Therefore, improving the service, because people will be thinking, oh, Couchweb always knows what I like. I really enjoy the service because they've always got a good recommendation for me. I always enjoy it. It brings me to something new. That improves the service. That becomes something that keeps people subscribing. So, of course, we have to keep people subscribing because then it's just cash coming to us every single month. And big data also, it's something that CIMA wants to be examining people on. It was something that was really introduced or really expanded on in the new syllabus change in 2015, and often comes up in a strategic case study exam. So please be aware of that. And we've got a good example here of why big data is important, how it could be relevant for Couchweb. So a bit of background now on Couchweb itself. So Couchweb was founded 20 years ago by Chet Nolan, Jen Kramer, and Joe Ying. The three founders have been friends since university, and before founding the company, Chet was an IT director for a company that designed websites. Jen was a lawyer specializing in contract laws and copyrights within a large company, and Joe was the marketing director for a large media company. So of course, it all sounds very much like a dream team right now. We have the person who was the IT director, IT very important as we know for an organization, for a company that designs websites. This company, of course, being an online business, will need a good website. It will need a very ergonomic website. There's a famous quote from Steve Jobs where he said about innovation is not what it does, innovation is how it feels. You need to have a website, you need to have a device that feels good. People like using it. It's one of the reasons why the iPhone has become so popular, because it's a very complicated device that has a lot of functions, but it's so simple to use that anyone can use it. And that, in a sense, is also part of the innovation. So we need to have an effective website that is easy to use, that is ergonomic to use, that people like it. Jen was a lawyer specializing in contract law and copyrights, obviously going to be very, very important, both for our own information and also for the information, for the data, for the licenses, for the rights of the companies that we are dealing with. So if we are going to Disney Studios and we are licensing some of their films, some of their television shows, then of course they are going to be very up on copyright. They're going to want to make sure that we are not breaching any of their copyrights when we share their material. They are going to insist on a lot of security in place to stop the sharing of information, etc. And so it's very good to have a lawyer on hand who specializes in all of that. And of course, Joe, being the marketing director of a large media company, we are a large media company and we need high volume. If we're only selling for a small subscription fee per month, if you think about a Netflix account, say costing $7.99 a month, and we want to make a lot of money off that, or we need to make a lot of money of that, then we're looking at low value, high volume. So of course, with high volume, we need to ensure that the most people see it, or as most people as we possibly can see the Couchweb adverts. They see what Couchweb is, they get enticed by it, we try it out. And so of course, having a marketing director is very important. So based on this, we can say that the directors of the organization, or at least the founders, provided they are still within the organization, are very suited to the task in hand. And so, of course, they will be key stakeholders to the organization. And some information about how they operated when they first started. And essentially, how Couchweb started was by renting out DVDs, but not in shops like Blockbuster, but by posted them to customers who then posted it back. Now, this is exactly how Netflix started. So again, we're building up perhaps the analogous link to Netflix, building up a profile of this company very much like Netflix. So you should be basing some of your research on Netflix. This is also useful from your point of view when it comes to analyzing the unseen information, analyzing the pre-seen information, answering questions in the exam. When we think about being realistic, we think about expressing business acumen effectively. Now, nothing will annoy the examiner, annoy the marker more than something that is poor business acumen. There's no way any real-life company in this position would do that. That's poor business acumen. And so when you are thinking about what Couchweb should be doing, think about, could you conceive of Netflix doing something like this? If you can conceive of Netflix doing something like this, then perhaps it is good business acumen. If it's something ridiculous like, oh, well, given that we have a lot of money in the bank, we should be investing in airlines or fuel and oil and gas. We should start our own construction company, etc., that starts to become poor business acumen. That's a huge jump into an area which requires a huge amount of capital. It's not something that you can conceive of Netflix doing, and therefore it's perhaps poor business acumen to suggest that, and that will annoy the examiner, it will annoy the marker. And whilst this service was very popular, because of course people want things directly to their home, that's how the whole idea of online streaming service started. Again, people don't want to have to perhaps wait for something to come on television. They don't want to have to go out to the shops to buy a DVD, to go to Blockbuster to rent a DVD. They're in their home, it's late at night, all the shops are shut, they fancy watching a movie, they want it now. And so that's why having a postage system perhaps worked well. Although, of course, it wasn't as instantaneous as the online services. And, of course, this was expensive to do because, of course, postage costs. The postage was all due from the company themselves. So as in the person renting the DVD didn't pay for the postage, it was all prepaid. So very high costs there. So again, going back to value chains, our operations were very expensive. But then, of course, came the dawn of broadband internet, where people were able to use internet far more widely, far more frequently, and much more efficiently. Before, obviously, you had the dial-up, which was expensive, it was slow, and could never have supported a service like this. But of course, now it's getting more and more, bigger and better, faster all the time. And so the biggest threat to the business now with regards to streaming is, of course, the quality of fast and reliable internet connections. As highlighted here, and that there have only been capable of supporting Couchweb services, or internet has only been capable of supporting Couchweb services for the last 10 years. And of course, this won't be everywhere as well. There'll be countries where the internet is not as good as it is perhaps in the United Kingdom, in the United States, etc. There will be areas within those countries, more rural areas, where the internet quality is not as good as well. And so that obviously is going to have an impact. If you live in a huge centre such as London, Manchester, Bristol, Newcastle, somewhere like that, it's likely that you're going to have good internet connections. If you live right out in the Lake District, if you live out in the countryside, you're not going to have as reliable internet. And that, of course, is going to affect the amount of people who purchase an account. You're not going to pay $12 a month or £5 a month or €50 a month or whatever the cost, whatever the currency is, if you cannot effectively use the services provided. And so based on this, we can perhaps estimate that the company is going to continue to grow over the next few years as more and more people get aware of Couchweb, as more and more people start to use Couchweb, as it becomes one of the standard streaming services, and also as internet gets better as well. So of course this also depends on the external environment. So we're thinking about pestel analysis. We need to think about the technological capabilities of products, of technology that people are using. As internet gets better and better, as devices get better and better, smaller, quicker, more efficient, etc., more and more people are going to be using our services. As well, smart televisions, TVs that are connected to the internet, are becoming more and more popular. As more and more people buy these, as the cost of them comes down, then it's a really straightforward, simple way to watch online services on. Because of course, one of people's gripes with things like Netflix, with Amazon before, was that they said, oh, I like to watch television on my TV. I like to sit in my living room on my sofa and watch television. I don't want to have to use my laptop. I don't want to have to use my phone to watch television. But now, of course, with smart televisions, you can have the online service like the Netflix, like the Amazon, like the Couchweb, but still enjoy the living room environment. Still sit on the sofa watching it on your television. And as you can see, they have expanded quite rapidly over the last few years, both organically and by acquiring other media companies. Now, these two obviously are two of the big methods of growth which are important for you to consider when analyzing the pre-scene from a strategic point of view. And what we can identify here is these are the two main ways in which the company does like to grow. So of course the other one being joint ventures, where we work with another company. Acquiring companies means you are purchasing them outright or perhaps a part of them. This is obviously far more quicker than organically growing, but it can be very expensive, whereas organic growth is where you simply allow the company to grow and expand over time. So think about those two things as we go forward, perhaps more than joint ventures, insofar as the existing strategy has always been to expand by organic growth or by acquiring other companies. So that is those are the two ways in which the company grows. So think about that when thinking about strategy. And we can also assume by acquiring other companies, this is a way in which they have been able to expand into other countries, perhaps by purchasing the equivalent of Couchweb in another country. We also would expect to see a lot of intangible assets on the statement of financial position because, of course, when we purchase a company and we purchase a lot of internally generated intangible assets, we can add that to our statement of financial position because it improves the value of the organization. It's one of the reasons why we purchased those companies in the first place. And we are now one of the largest media companies in the world. And whilst we operated in mainland exclusively originally, we are now being streamed in over 100 countries in 20 different languages. So again, going back to what I was saying earlier about how we expand overseas, what are the risks there? Obviously, now we have to think about currencies. Now we have to think about issues with other governments. We also have to think about cultural things as well. So, for example, in the Western world, particularly in places like Scandinavia and Western Europe, it's very liberal with regards to the content that it can show, with regards to violence, with regards to sexual content, etc. Whereas in other parts of the world, perhaps in the Middle East, etc., where it's far more conservative to those sorts of things, we need to be careful about what we show. So we need to make sure that the kinds of programs that perhaps would offend audiences in other countries are not available when people log on in those countries. And there's obviously inherent opportunities here with regards to expanding. What if we perhaps expanded to even more countries? What if we expanded to countries with different languages so we had even more people that we could reach? This would be a market development strategy. We're improving our market offerings to more people. Obviously, there are far more than 100 countries in the world, and there are far more than 20 languages spoken in the world. So plenty of opportunity to bring our same product, our same offering to many different people. And so the big thing that separates Couchweb with traditional broadcasters is obviously the fact that we stream all over the internet. We don't use transmitters, we don't use satellite dishes, etc. And so, of course, that keeps costs down. Because when you have aerials, when you have satellite dishes, you have to pass some of those costs on to the person who is buying it. So when you, perhaps in the UK, the biggest satellite provider is a company called Sky. If you want a Sky box added, you have to pay for a Sky satellite dish. And Sky satellite dishes can cost quite a lot of money. And that, of course, means that it's more expensive and therefore perhaps doesn't seem to be as good value. Particularly given that the main difference between the online service and the satellite is the ability to show live television. And of course, more and more people are not watching TV live anymore. They are watching it on streaming services such as Netflix, such as Amazon, such as Couchweb. And another way in which separates them is the use of adverts. Now, on Netflix and things like that, you don't have any adverts, whereas most terrestrial channels, so in the UK, if you're thinking about ITV, you're thinking about Sky, etc., they use ad breaks in television programs, and particularly this is even more prevalent in countries like the United States. That is how it is paid for. That's how a lot of those companies make their money, is by selling advertising space, because a lot of people are going to watch it. But of course, ad space is becoming more and more expensive and actually becoming less and less effective as people don't use it as much. So there is a real risk of decline in the traditional television industry. Now, it's not to say that it will disappear overnight. Television's been around for a long, long time, and it's likely to be around for a long, long time as well. But it's no doubt in decline as a result of the growth of companies such as Netflix, such as Amazon, and the just general changes, the economics in the way in which people view and consume content. But, of course, these major companies are not fools. They know that companies like Couchweb are competing with them. They know that they are affecting their revenues, and so a lot of them have acted accordingly. Now, if you think about the UK market, the BBC, ITV, Channel 4, and Sky have all, in addition to their live services, have brought out their own versions of streaming content, particularly given that a lot of these programs, particularly Channel 4, companies like that make their own programs, now have free-to-access services where they show their television programs on demand. So if you think about 4 on demand, which is Channel 4's one, the big one in the UK, so rights to a lot of television shows such as Peep Show and other shows that were created by Channel 4. And so, in a sense, they are giving the customers what they want so that they are competing with us. So that could develop over time as well. It could be that more and more of these channels will go online full-time in the future. If you think about the BBC had 4 main channels, BBC 1, 2, 3 and 4. BBC 3 particularly aimed at younger audiences who view content online more than older audiences, and as a result, BBC 3 now only exists online. They don't broadcast BBC 3 anymore. It's just available live on iPlayer, or in an on-demand sense on iPlayer. And so the threat of new entrants into this field is high, particularly given that it is a growing market, but not just from new companies and tech companies, but also traditional media companies who are also creating their own versions of on-demand. So we are competing with them particularly on 2 fronts. One, that they're going to enter our market, and 2, that their traditional market, live television, also competes for airtime with our market. But of course, we save money in our running costs because of the fact that we don't expect them, or we don't require people to purchase any hardware. All they need is an internet connection, all they need is a television, a smartphone, a tablet, etc. All of which, of course, they will buy themselves because they use them for so many things other than consuming content. So this allows us to keep costs down. So our operations are done at quite a cheap rate compared to the competitions, and that allows us to keep the content high, as in we purchase the best quality content, which of course again is good for our value chain, how we're adding value. You think about inputs, think about inbound logistics, that will be the quality of the content, the quality of the programs we are getting, as well as the cheap and efficient operations that allows us to pass on the low cost to the consumer. And it's important that we do this. It's critical to the business that we do this, because subscriptions are kept at a low price, because this attracts the high volumes of subscribers. Going back to what I was saying earlier about how this is a low value, high volume business. We can't afford to lose lots of subscribers by putting our prices up. So perhaps it would be worth doing some sort of pricing analysis to find out the optimum price to provide the best possible profit, or profit optimization. Perhaps we'll lose X amount of customers for every dollar or every cent that we put the price up. But of course, we're gaining an extra dollar, extra cent for every sign up that stays. So we perhaps look at that together and we find out the suitable price that gets us the most possible subscribers and keeps the cost, or keeps the profit high. And it could be that we have to review the prices every so often when, of course, competitors start offering products for cheaper prices. Perhaps they're offering for more expensive prices, and that actually has a negative effect on us, because perhaps the consumer looks at it and think, well, if here at Couchweb, they're only charging this amount, but this competitor is charging twice that. Does that mean that that competitor has got the better shows, the better programs, producing the best own content, because it's obviously getting more money in? Another key bit of information here is how much they value innovation. So, of course, it's saying here that Couchweb has introduced a number of key innovations in its business model, in its use of technology, and that has allowed it to expand. That has allowed it to achieve. So, constant innovation is important when we're thinking about the balanced scorecard and how we can measure the success of an organization, perhaps the number of innovations introduced, the number of innovations that have yielded a return would be good metrics for that. But of course, and the founders agree, and I'm sure you agree as well, is that the quality of the content is ultimately what sells subscriptions. So it's important to have the best quality programs, the best quality films, or at least the things that people actually want, the things that the most people actually want. You almost need to think of it from a utilitarian point of view. Which particular program appeals to the most people and is going to sell the most subscriptions? It doesn't matter how nice and efficient your website is, how easy it is to use, all these innovations, etc., how much technology it utilizes. If the programs that you have on it are programs that people are not interested in watching, they're not going to keep their subscriptions active. And of course, given that they can cancel their subscriptions at any time, it's easy for them to do so, easy for them to switch to a different provider if they want to. And so it's important that we keep the consumer satisfied. So before we finish this first video, just going to summarize a few of the key points here. So if we perhaps look at a SWOT model, so that's an assessment of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, we can already see a few starting to appear. Of course, the strength of the organization is in its size. It's one of the leading companies. It's very innovative or constantly innovating, good use of technology, and so on. The weaknesses apparent so far could be the fact that it offers no downloading service. It hasn't got a diversified product range at the moment, as in it doesn't, like Amazon, for example, have music, it doesn't have photos, it doesn't have data storage. But there are plenty of opportunities to bring those in. So they could offer a download function, they could offer music, they could offer perhaps access to more live television shows or reality shows, things like that, that can also be streamed online. The things that the other companies, the more traditional companies, are still doing well in. Even though traditional television watching has decreased, particular shows, a lot of your reality TV shows, your Made in Chelsea's, Only Way is Essex, etc., are still very popular. Perhaps they also have the potential to introduce a pricing structure. So in terms of what you get for what you purchase. At the moment, it's not completely clear, but it seems to suggest that it's just a one-off monthly subscription for everything. Perhaps you could build a tiered process in. So perhaps you can purchase just the movies or just the television shows, depending on what you like, and save money in terms of not having to pay for things you don't want. Perhaps you could have more screens, more devices for more of a cost. One of the ways Netflix does it as well, by offering you access to the quality. The basic subscription allows you to use standard definition, so 480p, 720p. The medium allows you to watch in high definition, so that's the 1080p. And the most expensive option allows you to access 4K, which of course is better than high definition. It's the most advanced, most current definition, but of course that is also limited by the televisions that can provide it. And also there are threats to the organization, such as increased competition, as it's a growing market, both from new companies and also traditional media companies as they try and branch into the market. Also have to think about threats to copyrights, threats to information sharing as well. And another thing I want to talk about is we need to start building up a picture of the kinds of stakeholders there are to the organization. So what we're going to do is look at the Mendelow's matrix, of course, shows you the people who are low interest, low power, as in they can't really affect what we do. People who are high interest, that means they care what we're doing but don't have much power. People who perhaps have a lot of power but don't really care what we're doing, and also people who have a lot of power and care what we're doing, as I'm sure you're aware of the Mendelow's matrix. And this is important because as we look at ways in which the company could improve going forward, we look through the pre-scene, look at their various strategies, etc. We need to consider the stakeholders or keep the stakeholders in mind, because that will affect how we go about doing it. So of course, low interest and low power would be people who aren't really interested in what we're doing as long as we keep doing it, or perhaps they just don't care at all. So this perhaps would be employees at suppliers, people that we get the servers from, people that we get our hardware from, etc., or the employees of the people we get our hardware from, and perhaps some of the networks that we get some of the syndicated shows from that aren't their big products, that aren't their, their superstar film or their superstar show that is associated with that studio. It's just some show that they produced 20 years ago and it wasn't really that popular, and it's just we pay a small fee to have it somewhere on our website. Then of course your high interest, low power would be your employees, so that people who are interested in what the organization does, of course, because they are paid by the organization, but as an individual perhaps don't have too much power unless they band together. Of course, as they're unionized, then they will have more power. You also put consumers in there as well, our customers, because whilst individually they have a lot of interest because they use our product, they want to know what's going on with it, they want to know when we're improving our services, etc. Given that we have millions of consumers using our products, each individual doesn't have that much power. Obviously as a group they do, but individually they don't. The typical low interest, high power would be the banks and also the governments. So as long as we pay off our debts, the banks aren't going to mind what we do. As long as we abide by laws, the government aren't going to care what we do. But of course, both of those parties do have a lot of power to affect us if they choose. So if the government brought in new legislation affecting what we can and can't show online, that would have a big impact. And finally, your high interest, high power, people who care what we're doing and also have a lot of power to affect it. So what we've built so far from the pre-scene, or what we've noticed so far, is the founders will obviously be very powerful, will obviously be very interested, key shareholders of the organization as well, and possibly even your big studios who offer the big shows. So for example, say Disney or Fox or someone like that, that perhaps had a lot of their shows on our services, a lot of their movies on our services, and therefore it's a real risk to them to give up the licensing or to share the licensing to an external company. They're going to have a lot of interest in what we're doing and would really affect our business if they pulled out. If, for example, we were suddenly told that this particular production company that produces several of our favorite shows, or the shows that are really popular on our website, says, no, we don't think you're looking after our products well, we want to pull the licensing, that could have a huge impact on our sales. Because of course, as we know from that final paragraph, the content is what sells subscriptions. If a major company that provides a lot of the shows that people want to watch pulls their licensing from us and we cannot show it on our website, that's going to cause a lot of subscribers to leave. And that brings us to an end, or to a conclusion of this first video on the pre-scene. As I'm sure you're aware, we've only looked at pretty much a page and a half, maybe 2 pages of information, all very quite broad introductory bits of information as well, and yet we've already got all this information from it. So there really is a lot that you can scroll down into, a lot that you can dig deep into in the pre-scene, and all this information that we've looked at here will set us up as we continue to analyze the pre-scene. We've got a lot of background, a lot of context now to build on. Information over strategy, information over critical success factors, information over stakeholders, of how they add value, etc., IT strategies that we can now build on, we can now keep in mind as we continue our analysis through the pre-scene. So I hope you've enjoyed this sample video and more importantly found it useful. Before I go, I'd like to quickly tell you about a few of the products that we do here at Astranti Financial Training, specifically for our case study courses. We have a study text which details all the key theories in which you will be expected to use in your case study exam, as well as details of how to approach the pre-scene and the case study. We also have a series of course videos detailing how to answer case study questions. This is actually an area in which many students struggle. Most of the scripts that I've seen, the failing scripts that I've seen, has actually been due to poor case study technique rather than lack of knowledge. We also have a series of pre-scene analysis videos based on the current up-to-date pre-scene, detailing all the key bits of information and likely issues you may face in the exam. Next up is the industry analysis, a pack detailing information about the industry that the pre-scene company resides in, information about the key players within that industry, and more background information on the industry in general. We also have a range of mock exams created for each level and based on the current pre-scene, which is a great way to get some practice in before you sit the real thing. We also offer marking and feedback on those mock exams so you can see where you are going wrong and where you can improve. Finally, we have the master classes. These are 2 one-day classes taken by our expert tutors to give you all the hints and tips you need to really add to your chances of passing the exam. Also, if you take our full course, we offer a pass guarantee, which, provided you have met all the requirements of the pass guarantee, you will get a free resit on the next exam should you fail to pass. So once again, thank you for your time. If you're interested in any of these products, please visit the website www.astranti.com for more information. Thank you.